BYD has now overtaken Tesla in global sales, and its cheapest car is priced around $10,000. But that's not even the most surprising part. That same budget car already comes standard with driver assistance technology that, in many cases, exceeds what you'd find in a fully loaded Ford F-1 5.0. In 2025, BYD made this tech standard across its entire lineup. No extra fees, no higher trims, no add-ons. A company most Americans still barely recognize is already reshaping the cost of the next car you might buy. From batteries to vehicles, the BYD origin story. Many people think BYD is primarily a car maker, but that wasn't its original identity. The company, whose name stands for Build Your Dreams, began in 1995 in Shenzhen, China, as a rechargeable battery manufacturer. It was founded by Wang Chuanfu, a chemist who started the company with about $300,000 in capital and a small factory that reverse-engineered Japanese battery technology at much lower costs. By 2000, BYD had become the world's largest producer of nickel-cadmium batteries. Just 2 years later, it was the leading supplier of lithium-ion batteries globally. At that stage, it still wasn't building cars. Instead, it was building the core components that would eventually power them. The automotive shift came in 2003, when BYD acquired a struggling Chinese automaker called Sichuan Automobile. Then, in 2008, Berkshire Hathaway, led by Warren Buffett, invested about $232 million for a 10% stake. A move that seemed unusual at the time but is now considered one of the most successful bets in automotive history. That stake later grew to be worth over $8 billion at its peak in 2021. The advantage: full vertical integration. What truly sets BYD apart from other EV manufacturers is how much it produces in-house. The company makes its own batteries, electric motors, semiconductors, glass, steel, seat materials, almost everything. This level of vertical integration gave BYD a major advantage during the COVID-era supply chain crisis. While other automakers had to halt production due to chip shortages, BYD kept running with far fewer disruptions. For example, when Ford needed semiconductors in 2021, it had to wait months and negotiate with external suppliers. BYD, on the other hand, could source chips internally through its own subsidiaries. That difference isn't just operational efficiency. It's a structural advantage that took years to build and would take competitors just as long to replicate. The Blade battery breakthrough. One of BYD's most important innovations is its in-house Blade battery, introduced in 2020. Traditional EV batteries are built using cylindrical or prismatic cells arranged in multiple layers, cells inside modules, inside packs. BYD's Blade battery removes the module layer entirely. The cells are stacked directly into the pack like blades in a structure. This design improves space efficiency by about 50%, simplifies manufacturing, and significantly enhances safety. Most notably, it passed the nail penetration test, the toughest battery safety test, without catching fire. Earlier EV battery designs, including some used by Tesla, struggled with this type of testing. Today, the Blade battery is used across everything from BYD's lowest-cost models to its premium luxury vehicles, all built on a shared platform designed for scale and cost efficiency. The technology remains proprietary, meaning competitors are still trying to reverse engineer what BYD achieved years ago. Policy support and early advantages. Another often overlooked part of BYD's rise is China's policy direction. In 2009, electric vehicles were declared a strategic national industry, leading to subsidies, tax incentives, and favorable financing for domestic companies like BYD. Critics, especially in the U.S., argue that this support artificially lowered BYD's costs. That influence did exist, particularly in the early years. However, BYD has also become consistently profitable in recent years without relying heavily on subsidies. Its manufacturing efficiency is widely considered world-class, and innovations like the Blade battery are genuine engineering achievements. Both realities can be true. Early government support helped the company grow, and strong engineering helped it survive and scale. The scale of BYD today, the numbers behind BYD's growth are hard to ignore. In 2024, the company sold 1.76 million pure electric vehicles and a total of 3.4 million vehicles when including plug-in hybrids. That represents a 41% increase from the previous year. Revenue reached $107 billion, up 29% year over year, while net profit stood at $5.6 billion. These are no longer startup figures. They reflect a large, rapidly expanding industrial giant that continues to gain momentum in the global auto market. To put things in perspective, Ford's global revenue in 2024 was about $185 billion, but its electric vehicle division alone is estimated to have lost around $5 billion. General Motors did slightly better, but analysts still believe it burned roughly $2.5 billion on EV operations once factory upgrades and retooling are included. BYD, meanwhile, generated $5.6 billion in net profit while growing about 41% year over year. The direction of those two trajectories is clearly different, and the gap between them isn't shrinking, it's expanding. BYD accelerates instead of slowing down. In January 2025, BYD launched new flagship models like the Han L and Tang L. At the same time, it made a major announcement. Its advanced driver assistance system, called God's Eye, would come standard on every vehicle, across every price segment, with no additional cost. That decision sent a strong signal across the industry. God's Eye includes features like adaptive cruise control across all speeds, lane centering, automated parking, and highway driving assistance, features that many automakers typically charge between $3,000 and $15,000 for as optional packages. BYD simply included them even in its lowest-priced cars. Even Elon Musk reacted on X with a brief, "impressive." And when the CEO of Tesla publicly acknowledges a competitor's tech move, the industry tends to pay attention. Market impact and sales momentum. In the first quarter of 2025, BYD sold around 416,000 fully electric vehicles, a 59% increase compared to the same period the previous year. To understand the scale, the entire U.S. EV market sold roughly 350,000 units in that same quarter. That means BYD alone sold more EVs in 3 months than the entire American market combined. That includes more vehicles than Tesla, Ford Lightning, Chevrolet Silverado EV, Rivian, Lucid, Hyundai, and Kia sold in the U.S. together over the same period. Charging breakthrough. The Super E platform. In March 2025, BYD introduced its Super E platform, along with a major leap in charging technology. The system can reportedly add around 400 kilometers, about 250 miles of range, in just 5 minutes. The performance is powered by a 1,000-volt system operating at extremely high current levels, far beyond what most existing charging infrastructure in the U.S. can support today. The Han L, built on this platform, can accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 2.9 seconds. BYD also plans to deploy around 4,000 ultra-fast charging stations across China by the end of 2025, specifically designed for this technology. For comparison, the entire United States currently has roughly 6,500 Tesla supercharger stalls in total. The difference in scale is striking. Meanwhile, other EVs still face challenges. The Ford Lightning continues to struggle with range in cold climates. The Chevrolet Blazer EV faced software-related recalls before many customers even drove it in winter conditions, and the Rivian R1T, while widely respected, still charges significantly slower and costs around $70,000. None of this is about lack of talent in Western engineering teams. The real difference comes from years of compounding investment in EV-focused technology that many legacy automakers didn't prioritize in the early 2000s. The ultra-low-cost EV benchmark. One of the clearest examples of BYD's cost advantage is the Seagull, priced at roughly 69,800 yuan in China, around $9,700. Despite the price, it offers a 300-kilometer range, a modern touchscreen infotainment system, rear parking sensors, and a design that feels like a full modern vehicle rather than a stripped-down budget car. In 2023, analysts at UBS disassembled the model and estimated that BYD's manufacturing cost per vehicle is about 35% lower than comparable Volkswagen models, even at this price point. That kind of cost structure puts intense pressure on Western automakers, many of whom already operate on thin margins in the EV space. The geopolitical layer. For now, BYD does not sell passenger vehicles in the United States. That's a crucial point. The cars that aren't available in the U.S. are already competing strongly and often outperforming vehicles that are, and expansion is coming. The only real question is how and when it will enter the U.S. market. Globally, BYD already sells in more than 70 countries. In Europe alone, it sold about 120,000 vehicles in 2024. That may not seem huge compared to the total market, but the growth rate has been fast enough to push major European automakers into urgent internal discussions. In fact, Volkswagen, Europe's largest automaker, announced factory closures in Germany in 2024, something it had never done before. While multiple factors contributed, BYD's growing presence is part of the pressure. The European Union responded by imposing tariffs of up to 35% on Chinese electric vehicles in late 2024. BYD's reaction wasn't to retreat. Instead, it began building a factory in Hungary to produce vehicles locally and bypass those tariffs. That move reflects a long-term strategy rather than a short-term reaction, signaling a company preparing for sustained global expansion rather than slowing down. In Australia, the BYD Auto 3 quickly became one of the fastest-selling electric vehicles in the country's history. Across Southeast Asia, BYD has built a strong lead in markets like Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam. In Brazil, the company is developing a factory on the site of a former Ford plant, a symbolic shift that hasn't gone unnoticed. In Mexico, which is closely watched by Detroit, BYD is also building an assembly plant. That move raises the possibility of bypassing U.S. import tariffs through regional production and potentially qualifying under USMCA trade rules. The U.S. government imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs in 2024, and those restrictions were further reinforced in 2025. While this makes direct entry into the U.S. market financially unrealistic for now, the Mexico strategy introduces a more complex scenario, and the pressure is already being felt. It's not about BYD cars filling American showrooms today, but about BYD's influence pushing every global competitor to improve or fall behind. A buyer of a Hyundai Ioniq 6, for example, is indirectly benefiting from the pricing and charging pressure BYD has placed on Hyundai. The same goes for GM. Its EV strategy is shaped by the reality that BYD is waiting just outside the tariff wall, ready to enter if conditions change. Even without selling a single car in the U.S., BYD is already reshaping the competitive landscape. Deep integration into the global auto industry, BYD's influence goes far beyond finished vehicles. It is deeply embedded in the global supply chain. The company has joint ventures with Toyota, including EV production in China under the BYD-Toyota partnership, and collaborates with Stellantis on electric platforms. It also supplies batteries and components to major automakers like Toyota and Ford. In other words, while American consumers may not be buying BYD vehicles directly, many are already using cars that contain BYD technology. The line between BYD and the Western auto industry is already much blurrier than tariffs suggest, expanding brands and new segments. In 2024, BYD also introduced a new premium sub-brand called Fang Chengbao, often translated as Leopard, aimed at off-road and adventure-focused buyers. Think Jeep Wrangler territory, but fully electric, and priced in a way that puts pressure on established players like Stellantis. The brand's early production in China sold out quickly, signaling strong demand in that segment. What this means for buyers. For everyday consumers, the impact depends on perspective. If you're an EV buyer in the US, you're already benefiting from BYD's competitive pressure, even without directly interacting with the brand. Tesla reduced prices multiple times between 2023 and 2025, including dropping the Model 3 from around $46,000 in 2022 to about $38,990 today. Ford cut up to $8,000 from the Mustang Mach-E in 2023. GM launched the Equinox EV at around $35,000, a price point influenced by global competition. None of these moves were accidental. They were responses to a rapidly tightening global EV market where BYD plays a major role. For buyers waiting for EVs to become more affordable, this global price pressure is accelerating that timeline. A $25,000 mainstream EV, which once felt far off, is now increasingly realistic in the 2026 timeframe. BYD has helped prove that lower-cost EV production is possible at scale, forcing competitors to close the gap. If you're primarily a truck or SUV buyer, the immediate impact is less direct. BYD's current lineup focuses more on sedans and compact crossovers, while the U.S. pickup market is shaped by very specific expectations around towing, durability, and cultural preference. However, that gap may not last forever. BYD has already entered adjacent segments with models like the BYD Shark, a plug-in hybrid pickup launched in Mexico and parts of Latin America in 2024, which quickly became a top-selling truck in that market. It suggests that even the pickup segment isn't permanently out of reach. It's just not the first battlefield. Performance and luxury ambitions. For automotive enthusiasts, the most technically ambitious part of BYD's lineup isn't its budget cars, it's its high-performance and luxury division. The Yangwang brand represents that push. Its U9 supercar is a roughly 1,100 horsepower, four-motor electric vehicle with independent wheel torque control so precise that it can perform unusual movements, including lifting or hopping in place, thanks to its advanced suspension system called DSUS X. It's a clear signal that BYD isn't just competing on cost anymore, it's also targeting the high-performance and luxury segments traditionally dominated by European and American brands. They even demonstrated it on stage, where all four wheels lifted off the ground at the same time. It sounds unbelievable, but it's a real engineering showcase of what precise independent wheel control can do at this level of power. The Yangwang U8 luxury SUV takes things even further. It can continue driving on three wheels if one axle is disabled. It can also float on water for short distances, something that has been tested and documented, not just shown in computer-generated visuals. On top of that, It can rotate 360 degrees in place, effectively turning on its own axis without moving forward or backward. These aren't compliance cars built just to satisfy regulations. They're demonstrations of what becomes possible when a company controls its entire technology stack, has deep battery expertise built over years, and is willing to explore ideas that would make engineers at traditional automakers stop and question how it's even achievable. Is all of this practical for everyday driving? Not really. A floating SUV doesn't solve most people's commute problems, but it does reveal something important about BYD's engineering mindset. A willingness to push beyond conventional limits that many legacy automakers seem to have lost decades ago. The bigger picture. And this is where the story becomes bigger than just cars. BYD's rise isn't only about vehicles. It's about manufacturing strength, technological control, global trade dynamics, and the future direction of the American auto industry over the next 20 years. The U.S. auto industry built its identity around internal combustion engines, V8s, trucks, muscle cars, and the sound and feel of combustion itself. That identity is deeply rooted in American culture and isn't disappearing anytime soon. But the systems behind it, factories, suppliers, engineering priorities, and decades of combustion-focused investment were all designed for a completely different technological era. Shifting that entire ecosystem toward electric vehicles is slow, expensive, and difficult. General Motors, for example, has spent tens of billions of dollars on EV development through 2025, yet still struggles to match BYD's cost structure. Ford's EV division has lost billions in a single year. BYD, on the other hand, never had to switch to EVs. It was built inside that world from the beginning. Batteries, electrification, and manufacturing efficiency aren't a transition for them. They're the foundation. That difference creates a structural advantage that doesn't disappear simply because other companies invest more money. It's the kind of gap that builds over decades and is extremely hard to close quickly. Even industries like aerospace show a similar pattern. Spending heavily to rebuild manufacturing strength after years of outsourcing doesn't instantly restore lost expertise. Money alone isn't enough. Time and accumulated experience matter just as much. Time, tariffs, and pressure. Tariffs and trade restrictions are currently shielding American automakers from full direct competition. That protection buys time, but time only matters if it's used effectively. The real question is whether that window is being used to genuinely close the gap in technology and cost, or simply to delay facing it. Because trade barriers don't last forever. Policies shift, political priorities change, and production eventually moves to wherever it makes the most sense economically. What U.S. automakers do with this period will likely determine whether they remain globally competitive in 2035, or whether they follow the path of industries that lost their edge after a period of protection. BYD's stated ambition. BYD's leadership has been very direct about its goals. In 2024, Wang Chuanfu said the company doesn't just aim to be China's largest automaker, it aims to be the largest automaker in the world. A few years ago, that might have sounded like bold ambition. Today, it increasingly sounds like a timeline rather than a vision. Still, there's a scenario where this competition benefits everyone, regardless of which company wins. What it means for consumers. More competition at the highest level of automotive technology usually leads to faster innovation and lower prices across the board. BYD's 5-minute charging concept, for example, puts pressure on every charging network and automaker to improve. Its decision to include advanced driver assistance systems as standard equipment forces competitors to rethink what should be optional versus included. Even the $10,000 Seagull, whether or not it ever enters the U.S. market, reshapes expectations about what an affordable car can be. That kind of pricing influences consumer perception globally, which eventually affects what other manufacturers are forced to build. In that sense, competition across borders still benefits buyers everywhere, even if they never directly purchase a BYD vehicle. The open question. So, where does that leave things? Do you look at BYD's global expansion and think you'd want one if it ever became available in your market? Or do you firmly prefer domestic brands regardless of the technological gap? Or maybe you're somewhere in between, supporting local industry but questioning whether it can stay competitive without matching what's happening globally. That tension is exactly what defines the current moment in the auto industry. This is where the story continues, not just about companies or countries, but about how the next generation of cars will actually be built, priced, and experienced.